Good afternoon. I'm Yvonne Williams, president of the Greater Macon Chamber of Commerce. We're so thrilled to have our chamber members and business operators and distinguished leadership from Macon Bibb joining us this afternoon for a very enlightening program. The chamber brings these town hall meetings to our community every week in an effort to update and inform us on key issues and information of relevance. We're so pleased to have our chairwoman, Jillian Magda, joining us today to introduce our very special congressman.
Thank you, Yvonne. Congressman Sanford D. Bishop Jr. is serving his 14th term in the U.S. House of Representatives, representing Middle and Southwest Georgia's 2nd Congressional District. A leader among the fiscally responsible Democrats in Congress, Congressman Bishop has served on the House Committee on Appropriations since 2003. In addition to being the chairman of the Agriculture, Rural Development, Food and Drug Administration, and Related Agencies Appropriations Subcommittee. Congressman Bishop also serves as the co-chair of the Congressional Military Family Caucus, the vice chair of the Military Construction, Veterans Affairs, and Related Agencies Appropriations Subcommittee, and a senior member of the Financial Services and General Government Appropriations Subcommittee. Bishop was first elected to Congress in 1992. After serving in the Georgia House of Representatives from 1977 to 1990, and then in the Georgia Senate from 1991 to 92. Bishop graduated from Morehouse College in 1968 and from Emory Law Schools in 1971. He is an Eagle Scout, a 33rd degree Mason, a Shriner, a life member of Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity, and a deacon and trustee of the Mount Zion Baptist Church in Albany. He enlisted in the U.S. Army in 1969 and successfully completed basic training at Fort Benning here in Georgia. He then enrolled in Advanced Reserve Officer Training Corps training and later received an honorable discharge in 1971. Please welcome Congressman Sanford Bishop, who will give an update on the federal response to COVID-19. Following his remarks, Yvonne will ask questions that have been contributed by our chamber members. Congressman Bishop, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with the chamber members in Macon, Bibb County, Middle Georgia. These are some really trying times, and it's I think a wonderful opportunity to be able to visit with your membership. Let me try to get right to the point, because I know that everyone is on a time-sensitive schedule. But let me just start by giving an overview of what the federal government and what Congress has done recently. As you are probably aware, on March the 4th, the House of Representatives passed the Coronavirus Preparedness and Response Supplemental Appropriations Act, the CARES Act. That act had a very good number of items that were designed to help the American people. One of them was free coronavirus testing for everyone who needs a test, including the uninsured, paid emergency leave with both 14 days of paid sick leave and up to 3 months of paid family and medical leave. Enhanced unemployment insurance, the first step that will extend protections for any workers that were furloughed, strengthen food security initiatives, including extending the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, free and reduced price lunches for school kids who are out of school, senior nutrition and food banks, and the work requirements for SNAP were paused for the duration of the public health crisis. We also increased federal funds for Medicaid as our states has faced an increase in their healthcare costs. This was designed to prevent states from having to cut benefits, from reducing the Medicaid rolls, or for increasing the cost to the enrollees. Then again, on March the 27th, Congress passed the Coronavirus Relief and Economic Security Act, which was an effort to provide relief to businesses, workers, healthcare providers, and the impacted communities. In this bill, we established the Paycheck Protection Program, provided grants under the Emergency Impact Disaster Loan Program. We created the Economic Impact Payments for taxpayers, created a relief fund for impacted communities. We expanded the Community Development Block Grant Program. We enhanced and expanded the unemployment programs and provided additional funding for the Federal Drug Administration, the CDC, the Department of Health and Human Services, and other agencies in order to combat the pandemic. Then on April 23rd, we passed the Paycheck Protection Program and Healthcare Enhancement Act. This provided the Paycheck Protection Program with an additional $310 billion because the initial $349 billion was really used very, very quickly and left a lot of businesses and taxpayers unsatisfied or unable to access the relief. So an additional $310 billion was provided. And because much of that went to the larger segment of the small businesses, those who had very, very strong relationships with traditional banking institutions, a lot of the smaller businesses, particularly the mom and pops, those under 25 employees, were left out and were not able to participate. So of the additional $310 billion provided in the April 23rd bill, in that $310 billion, $60 billion of it was set aside for smaller lenders, including state and federal credit unions and those that were serving communities where the relationships with the more established financial institutions that dominate the SBA program were pretty scarce. And our understanding is that this set aside is already depleted, but that the smaller institutions can still seek funds from the main PPP program. We also provided Emergency Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program with an additional $50 billion, which will support $350 billion in loans. In this particular bill, small farming operations with no more than 500 employees were specifically eligible to participate in the loan programs. They had been left out of the initial program. We provided $75 billion in funds for our hospitals and healthcare facilities. Under this measure, the funds could be used for medical supplies and equipment, including the personal protective equipment and the testing supplies, and for other activities such as funding emergency operation centers, retrofitting facilities, building temporary structures to handle the surge capacity. The hospitals and the healthcare providers that receive funding, they have to maintain documentation and submit reports to the Department of Health and Human Services. And within 60 days of enactment, and every 60 days thereafter, the department must report to Congress on how the funds had been obligated. And within 3 years, when the final payments are made, the Inspector General has to give a report to Congress on the expenditures. Now, of the $75 billion, $6 million would be available for Inspector Generals to oversee the activities. Finally, provided in the bill were $25 billion in national testing money, $11 billion for the states, local governments, and territories, and the tribal organizations were allocated to test for the COVID-19, to ramp up the laboratory capacity, to trace the spread of the disease, and to support employer testing, as well as to provide funds for employers to provide tests. $4.25 billion is set aside for areas to be designed based on the number of COVID-19 cases, so that the areas hit the hardest will be sure to get funding. $2 billion will be distributed to states according to a grant formula in which every state will receive some of this funding. And then $750 million it will go to the tribal organizations and the urban Indian health organizations. $1 billion for the Centers for Disease Control and the Prevention for Surveillance, expanding the laboratory capacity and the contact tracing or tracking of the spread. $1.8 billion for the National Institutes of Health to develop and implement testing, to accelerate research into rapid testing, to establish partnerships with governmental and non-governmental entities in order to fight the pandemic. $1 billion of it for the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, designed to research, development, and production of COVID-19 tests and supplies. Up to $1 billion to cover the cost of the testing for the uninsured, $825 million to support community health centers and rural health clinics, and $22 million for the Food and Drug Administration to support the testing. All of this is designed to make sure that every American can be tested and that can be tracing, and that they can, if possible, have the necessary isolation and treatment at no cost to the individual. So the Congress is appropriating funds so that this will be free testing for everyone. Then finally, last Friday, May 15th, the House of Representatives passed the HEROES Act, which seeks to provide significant assistance to the state and local governments, the workers, and the businesses. Now, this was passed by the House. It has not yet passed the Senate. There are questions as to whether or not the Senate will take it up, but our states, our counties, and our local governments have taken a tremendous hit as a result of the COVID-19 crisis. They've had to do expenditures and provide services that were not budgeted. And of course, they have in the process, because of the compulsory shutdown of the economy, lost tremendous amounts in tax revenues and other income that they would ordinarily have expected to receive, which has put them at a very, very deep, in a deep hole financially. So we heard from the National Governors Association, from the National League of Cities, from the National Conference of Mayors, from the National County Commission Association, of how they have been hit and how it is pushing them to the point of having to make some very, very difficult decisions on layoffs. Those layoffs would impact the first responders, our police, our fire, our emergency responders, our healthcare workers, our public works personnel, all of whom are working to try to keep us safe under this crisis. And of course, the teachers who were going to have to be laid off, or who will face those kinds of decisions our local school boards as they plan for the next school year with all of these unbudgeted for expenses. So unfortunately, both the Senate and the administration have expressed some skepticism about whether another relief bill is needed, and they want to press the pause button. But of course, many of our citizens can't place pause on the needs to go to the grocery store. They can't place pause on their house payments or their utility payments. And of course, everyone is very much in need. So what the House did was to try to address the many, many concerns that were requested, that were brought to our attention over the last several weeks. People and individuals and entities that were left out of the earlier bills who are suffering and who need some assistance. And so what the House tried to do is to respond to the concerns that have been raised from people all across the country. We've had conference calls with the Democratic caucus in the House, but almost 6 hours, at least 3 times a week, where we got feedback from members all over the country and the territories of what they were hearing and the deficiencies and the challenges that were being faced in their respective communities. So we provided nearly $1 trillion for state, local, territorial, and tribal governments to pay their vital workers, like the first responders, the health workers, and teachers who are in danger of losing their jobs. We expanded eligibility for the Paycheck Protection Program to include, and I'm sure the Chamber will be interested in this, the 501c6s,
Yes.
nonprofits. The 501c4s and 501c6s were left out of the initial eligibility for the Paycheck Protection Program. And of course, this new bill, the HEROES Act, would include all nonprofits of any size or any form. So the sixes and the fours will be included along with the 501c3s. We also provided an extension of the unemployment insurance through January rather than when it was expected to expire earlier in July. An additional direct payment to families of up to $1,200 per family member and up to a maximum of $6,000 per household. There are provisions to protect all of our citizens from losing their employer-provided health insurance with COBRA subsidies that the Congress will put the bill for to maintain coverage, and was a special enrollment period that was created for uninsured Americans. Now, for small businesses, you know that the recently passed COVID-19 response legislation creates several new programs, and it expanded existing ones to get assistance to small businesses and nonprofits during the crisis. This includes, as I referred earlier, to the Paycheck Protection Program to help cover the cost of retaining employees. The relief legislation also expanded the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, the EIDL, which implemented the Economic Injury Grant Program also, which would get smaller amounts of capital quickly out to businesses. And there's the Small Business Debt Relief Program to help with payments on current or petition or the SBA loans. It also created the Employee Retention Tax Credits. Now, with regard to the Paycheck Protection Program, it will provide 100% federally guaranteed loans to employers with fewer than 500 employees who maintain their payroll during the emergency. If the employers maintain the payroll, the loans will be forgiven for the amounts that they have expended for payroll over certain periods and certain other business expenses. Small businesses and nonprofits will be able to apply if they were in business February 15th of 2020, and the program will remain open for applications until June 30th, 2020. Loans under the Paycheck Protection Program may be made up to $10 million, amortized over 10 years, depending on a particular business's circumstances. These loans can be taken out from all current SBA 7A lenders, and most local banks are currently SBA 7A lenders, and many of the ones that are not are quickly joining the program. This program is not available to 501c6 organizations, professional associations, but of course it's available to the member companies and organizations that comprise the 501c6 membership. Let me just give you some summary. As of May 5th, the Paycheck Protection Program Round 2, as of 5 p.m. on May the 5th, had approved 1,119,860 loans with $996 billion plus dollars allocated. There were in let me go to the SBA Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, which provides eligible small businesses and nonprofits with fewer than 500 up to $2 million to help meet financial obligations and to meet operating expenses that could have been met had the disaster not taken place. The loan proceeds can only be used for working capital necessary to enable the business of the organization to alleviate the specific economic injury and resume normal operations. The interest rates for the emergency injury disaster loans are statutorily set at 4% per annum or less, and can have maturities up to 30 years. They are available only to businesses and private and nonprofit organizations that are located in a declared disaster area and have suffered substantial economic injury and are unable to obtain credit elsewhere, and are defined as the small businesses under the SBA regulations. The SBA Emergency Economic Injury Grants created by the CARES Act, and that provides for advances of up to $10,000 to small businesses and private nonprofits. And of course, that has to be conditioned upon the application for the SBA Economic Injury Disaster Loan. This advance is effectively a grant because it does not have to be paid back. Now, the final piece of this is the SBA Debt Relief Program. SBA would automatically pay the principal, the interest, and the fees of any current 7A, 504, or microloans for a period of 6 months. SBA would automatically pay the principal, interest, and fees of new 7A, 504 microloans that are issued prior to September 27th of this year. That would be those loans issued as a result of the CARES Act. If a current SBA service disaster loan was in regular servicing status on March 1st of 2020, then the SBA is providing automatic deferments through December 31st. And under the automatic deferral, interest will continue to accrue on the loan. Section 1201 monthly payment notices will continue to be mailed, which will reflect that the loan is deferred and no payment is due. The deferment will not cancel any established pre-authorized debt or recurring payments on the loan. Borrowers that prefer to continue making their regular payments during the deferment period can continue to do so. And after the automatic deferment period, borrowers will be required to resume their regular principal and interest payments. Now, the final piece, the Employee Retention Tax Credit. This was created by the CARES Act also, and it will allow eligible employers to claim a payroll tax credit of up to $5,000 per employee for qualified wages that are paid while the business is closed or having reduced operations due to COVID-19. The credit is computed as 50% of up to $10,000 in qualified wages that are paid to an eligible employee. And of course, eligible employees are generally those who've been employed by the business for at least 30 days. Health plan expenses can be treated as qualified wages when computing the tax credit, and the credit can be taken for wages paid after March 12th of this year and before January 1st of 2021. That, I think, is the general overview, but let me just give you a quick summary of the HEROES Act, which we passed on Friday. We tried to honor our heroes by providing nearly $1 trillion for state, local, territorial governments who need funds to pay their vital workers. We established a Heroes Fund for essential workers with a $200 billion fund to ensure that essential workers who have had to risk their lives working during the pandemic will receive what really amounts to hazard pay. We put money in to support testing, tracing, and treatment by providing another $75 billion for the COVID-19 testing, for tracing, for isolation. And you can see in Georgia, this is being implemented by Governor Kemp with collaboration with the University of Georgia, with the Augusta University Medical College of Georgia. They are conducting free tests all over the state as we speak to make sure that the widespread testing is implemented, because as we open the economy, we want to make sure that people have the confidence that if they go back to work or if they venture out of their sheltering in place, that they will not be exposed by other citizens or co-workers who have not been tested or who may possibly have the virus. Of course, we mentioned the additional direct payments to families, protecting the payroll, and of course, there are provisions that are put in to ensure worker safety. OSHA is directed by the bill to make sure within 7 days of passage that all of the workplaces will develop and implement infection control plans based on the CDC guidelines, and it will prevent employers from retaliating against any workers who report infection control problems. And of course, there will be support for, as I indicated, for nonprofits, the C6s. And finally, food security. We offered assistance for food banks. We also provided housing assistance to help families afford a safe place to live. That's $175 billion that is in the bill to support renters, to support homeowners who need to make their monthly rent, mortgage, and utility payments and other housing-related costs. And of course, unemployment benefits have been extended to the end of the year. Those are the highlights, and let me just stop and be prepared to try to respond to any questions that you might have. But I want to thank you so much for this opportunity. Everybody in the country has been impacted by the virus. We are all forced to shelter in place. Congress has been forced really to enact some measures that change the way that we conduct the people's business by trying to accommodate utilizing the new technology so that we can operate remotely, get the people's business done, but at the same time remaining safe and keeping others safe who support the Congress. Our employees, our staff who do so much to keep us functioning. We want to make sure that we do not expose them and that we have a safe environment. So that's where we are. And if there are questions, I'll be happy to stop and to respond.
Oh, thank you so much, Congressman. That is very timely, especially as you describe the HEROES Act. We certainly thank you for the inclusion of the 501c6. As you know, chambers serve the very nature of the businesses affected. And if we can do our job properly with the adequate resources, we can affect thousands of companies that need their restoration back to the economy. With the HEROES Act, as you described, there's going to be a lot of compromise towards reaching consensus with the Senate. Do you see areas where y'all might have a lot of alignment, and what would you think that time frame would look like as you deliberate on the choice legislation?
Well, it's difficult for me to give you a time frame. The House enacted its bill. It took us, I guess, about 2.5 weeks to actually craft all of the pieces. All of the committees of jurisdiction contributed to the work product, but we tried to respond to the needs that had been expressed to us from throughout the country, from various organizations and associations like the Chambers of Commerce, like our rural water associations, and of course our nonprofits, our faith-based organizations, and many, many others. I described the state and local government associations that had reached out to us to explain to us just how they had been devastated by the crisis and the stay-at-home orders. So with all of this said, I would think that the state and local governments should get some relief, and I think that that should be pretty much consensus. I think a strong case has been made by all of them, and hopefully the Senate will be receptive to it. When you think about police, fire, emergency responders, public works people who have responded heroically during this crisis, and the people who have to drive the trucks to keep our grocery stores, the shelves stocked, and all of the others who do so much to keep us safe, we really, really have to do something to make sure that our states don't have to lay them off.
Yeah.
And I think it's incumbent on the House has done it. So I would hope that the chamber members and all of our citizens would reach out to our senators and let them know just how desperately needed this funding is. So I think state and local government relief, the relief to our hospitals and our healthcare workers for the assistance that is going to be provided, that's included in the bill, the food security provisions, helping our food banks. So many families have had to go to our food pantries in order to get food. And of course, we want to make sure that those pantries don't run out. And so we've tried to expedite that in this bill. For those people who have mortgages and those multifamily property owners who rent, who have renters who are out of work and unable to pay their rent, we want to make sure that they don't suffer because they have mortgages to pay on the multifamily housing units, just as the renters have rent to pay. So we want to make sure that that happens, and of course it's absolutely needed. And of course, I would hope that that would be consensus there, because we want to make sure that people don't have to default on their mortgages, and that the landlords are able to recoup something on their rent. We have also urged and included in the bill forbearance on the termination of utilities, forbearance on what we call set-outs, where people are being asked to be evicted. So there is a moratorium on that contained in the bill, but of course it's only a House bill at this point, and it's not yet law. But I think if the communities across the country will reach out to our senators and to the administration, letting them know how strongly these measures are needed, perhaps we can get some movement on it in the not too distant future.
Thank you so much. With your representation of the agricultural community, what are some of your thoughts about the food supply chain, how we're looking towards filling that gap among the restaurants that are having to be shut down? And there's certainly their demand and peak demands are not at levels that we once had the privilege of knowing. And how do we look at protecting the agribusiness community as a very significant base of our area of Central Georgia, Southwest Georgia, Southeast Georgia, as we deliberate through these next phases?
Well, first off, we were able in the last CARES Act to make sure that our farmers, that our agricultural businesses and small farmers under 500 employees were able to participate in the Paycheck Protection Program. There was some ambiguity initially, but they are now able to participate. With regard to the ag producers who supplied our restaurants and major facilities with food and who had that supply chain interrupted, we have worked with the Secretary of Agriculture. The Department of Agriculture is now purchasing a number of those supplies and making those available to our food banks so that all of that food will not be wasted. We've had milk producers who have been had to make decisions to destroy milk because they had nowhere to send it. We also had cattle farmers, beef producers, as well as other meat processors and poultry processors who were unable to send to processing plants the meat that they were producing, and they were in the position of having to consider euthanizing the cattle that they had been raising, which would have been a tremendous loss. And of course, we've had the added challenge of having our farmers who had products that needed to be harvested and needed to have guest workers who were not allowed to come into the country because the borders were shut down, and the Department of the Border Security people were not able to process their applications. So we did get the Secretary to work with the Department of Labor, and of course, those guest workers who were still in the country were expedited with telephone interviews so that they could provide a workforce for our farmers. And of course, we have had additional payments that will go to farmers to try to help tide them over during this crisis. But it's a real challenge that we face. Georgia is the number one industry. State of Georgia is agriculture. The number two industry is defense, and of course the number three industry is financial services. All of those industries have been touched as a result of this coronavirus. So we've got to get our people safe from the virus. We've got to get them tested, treated, and of course, in order for us to safely get back to some sense of normalcy. I don't know if we'll ever see and experience the kind of normalcy that we had before this virus, but we will do our dead level best to try to get us back to as normal a state as we can possibly get.
Thank you. That leads to my last question very nicely. You know, we've had a lot of challenges in Southwest Georgia, Central Georgia, with the cases that have been significant, the ability of the medical supply to properly be preparing for those cases. And yet the Middle Georgia area is a very big healthcare hub, which we're very thankful for the provisions made to the medical community to keep expanding resources for PPE equipment and all of the resources that they need. Are you satisfied with your leadership that we're balancing a measured approach with how we return to work for our small businesses that want to contribute to the economy, and our ability to have safety and help the employee standards as we do try to come back? Are we doing that in a measured approach from your perspective in our deliberations?
Well, I had some real serious concerns at the time when the governor began to ease the restrictions, because we, particularly in Middle and South Georgia, had experienced some pretty difficult and challenging cases our numbers had spiked tremendously. We were an epicenter, particularly in Southwest Georgia, in the Albany, Southwest Georgia area. And of course, to relieve the restrictions as early as they did there caused a great deal of concern. I was happy that we were, with the passage of the CARES Act, able to fund the testing and the tracing. And I was happy that the governor was able to employ the National Guard and the Medical College of Georgia resources to provide statewide testing, because only with widespread testing, where we know that people who may be asymptomatic have been tested, and they can be identified, isolated, treated, and of course have contact tracing for people with whom they came in contact. So the testing has been implemented, and it is being spread. I think we're close now to 500,000 people who have been tested within the state just over the past weekend. So that's a good thing. And but I have heard from some of our small businesses that they've had difficulty getting the personal protective equipment, the mask, to make sure that when their workers go back, they can provide them with those so that they can be safe. There is a challenge, and that challenge, I think, will keep us all vigilant. And I think following the CDC guidelines, if you don't have to go out, shelter in place, and if you do, follow the hygiene and the masking and the other requirements suggested by the CDC, I think that will get us, keep us as safe as we can be under the circumstances. But there are challenges and there are concerns, but we do have to have a measured movement as we ease back into opening the economy. The economy is inextricably tied to public safety. And of course, our economy will not be strong and not do very well if we go back too soon and we have another spike in the virus. At the same time, if we're able to ease back into it and to do it in a measured way, our capacity, fortunately, as we are able now to have enough hospital beds, to have enough testing apparatus, and to have the personal protective equipment so that we should be able to meet an additional surge should it happen. The increase has flattened, and it appears as if we see light at the end of the tunnel, but let's pray that by the grace of God, we can get through this and that we can find a vaccine and be able to kill the virus and get our communities back on track.
Well, thank you, Congressman. This is so valuable for our members, our community, to have this valuable time with you on very timely updates, and really a way that we can stay connected to you. And we will do that as we go forward. If we have routine opportunities to have these virtual conferences, this will be an excellent way to keep our members posted and our business community thriving towards correct and up-to-date information. I want to just thank you again for the time today. I want to remind our chamber members that this is a very important week to stay engaged. We have our mayoral candidates forum coming up Friday at 10 a.m. with all candidates participating. That will be monitored by Mr. Frank Malloy of WMAZ TV. This is your time to vote. Voting started today, early voting. You need to be exercising your American privilege and register to vote. Go out and vote and help us decide on a very big decision of our next mayor who will be leading Macon-Bibb. In the meantime, again, thank you for joining us. Thank you to Congressman Bishop and his wonderful team for accommodating this today, and we will keep you posted. We're greater together.
Thank you.